This is Land of Havilah, Psalm 86. It's 17 verses. It's a prayer all the way through. Verse 1. A prayer by David. Hear, Yahweh, and answer me, for I am poor and needy. Preserve my soul, for I am godly. You, my God, save your servant who trusts in you. Be merciful to me, Lord, for I call to you all day long. Bring joy to the soul of your servant, for to you, Lord, do I lift up my soul. For you, Lord, are good and ready to forgive, abundant in loving kindness to all those who call on you. Hear, Yahweh, my prayer. Listen to the voice of my petitions. In the day of my trouble I will call on you, for you will answer me. There is no one like you among the gods, Lord, nor any deeds like your deeds. All nations you have made will come and worship before you, Lord. They shall glorify your name, for you are great and do wondrous things. You are God alone. Teach me your way, Yahweh. I will walk in your truth. Make my heart undivided to fear your name. I will praise you, Lord my God, with my whole heart. I will glorify your name forevermore. For your loving kindness is great toward me. You have delivered my soul from the lowest Sheol. God, the proud have risen up against me. A company of violent men have sought after my soul, and they don't hold regard for you before them. But you, Lord, are a merciful and gracious God, slow to anger and abundant in loving kindness and truth. Turn to me and have mercy on me. Give your strength to your servant. Save the son of your servant. Show me a sign of your goodness, that those who hate me may see it and be shamed, because you, Yahweh, have helped me and comforted me. Comment in verse 1, David uses God's name Yahweh. Let's talk about the term Yahweh. In the Hebrew text, God has a name. It's used nearly 7,000 times, which is around 6 or 8 times per page on average. Yahweh spelled with the Hebrew letters Yod, He, Vav, He. Our unfamiliarity with it stems from the fact that most English translations render it Lord in all capital letters. When translated like that, we have no idea that the Hebrew of it is really a proper name. Unfortunately, since the earliest English translations rendered it that way hundreds of years ago, and those translations became popular, the subsequent translations were unwilling to buck the trend. Therefore, in the English-speaking world, unless you were a scholar, you didn't know about the term Yahweh. It's a mystery how the name was pronounced in ancient times because, of course, there are no audio recordings of it, and besides, words aren't always pronounced the way they're spelled, so to say those 4 letters should be pronounced Yahweh is somewhat a guess. But to say Lord there isn't even an attempt at being accurate. Lord's not even a name, it's more a description. But though Yahweh is a guess at the pronunciation, at least it's an attempt. That being said, if you or I go to a foreign country and they can't pronounce our name because it's too strange for them, we're glad to take on a name that's more familiar as long as they're being respectful. And no doubt God doesn't mind us calling him Lord, since it is respectful. He is Lord, but that's not what the text calls him 6 or 8 times per page. So Yahweh is his name as closely as we know how to pronounce it, and it's good to learn it. In verse 1, I am poor and needy. David's acknowledging there that he was poor and needy in the spiritual sense. Jesus said, apart from me, you can do nothing, John 15:5, so that makes us poor and needy every moment. In verse 2, preserve my soul, for I am godly. In what sense could David say he was godly? We might say he was despicable because he committed murder and adultery and other sins, but in the final analysis, God accepted him because he confessed and humbled himself, 2 Samuel 12:13. David could say, I'm godly in verse 2 of the psalm because God wiped his slate clean. After calling himself godly, in verse 3, he said, be merciful to me. So he recognized that he needed God to overlook his sin so he could keep being called godly. In verse 5, you, Lord, are ready to forgive. Let's not get stuck in the quagmire of thinking God isn't ready to forgive us. In verse 5, he is ready to forgive. He's abundant in loving kindness to all those who call on him in verse 5. If we get in a state of mind that we think he won't forgive us, that's just not correct. In verse 7, we need to file this one away for when we need it. Quote, in the day of my trouble, I will call on you, for you will answer me, end quote. In verse 9, this is one of the most repetitive prophecies in the Bible, quote, all nations you have made will come and worship before you, end quote. Romans 4:11 14:11 is like it, quote, "As I live, says the Lord, to me every knee will bow, every tongue will confess," end quote. In verse 11, "Make my heart undivided to fear your name," meaning make me fear you with the whole heart. I don't want my fear of God to be on again and off again. I want my fear of God to be consistent and without fail. In verse 13, "You have delivered my soul from lowest Sheol." Sheol's the place of departed spirits. Proverbs 9:18 and Isaiah 14:9. It's in a downward direction within the earth, Job 17:16 and 21:13. Otherwise, there's very little description of Sheol, very little revelation about it. There's not much indication the spirits of men are conscious in Sheol, and more indication they are not, quote, "For there is no work, no plan, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in Sheol," Ecclesiastes 9:10, and, quote, "For in death there's no memory of you, in Sheol who shall give you thanks," Psalm 6:5. But in the sense of verse 13, Sheol is not so much a place, but more like a troubled state of mind. God delivers from that in verse 13, and in Hosea 13:14, he can deliver from the other Sheol, the place of the dead. Quote, "I will ransom them from the power of Sheol. I'll redeem them from death. Death, where are your plagues? Sheol, where is your destruction?" End quote. In the modern godless materialistic mindset, material is all there is. There's no spirit or afterlife. There's just our physiology, the molecules and atoms of our bodies functioning the way they ought, and when they stop functioning, we die, and that's the end of us. In that mindset, we imagine that consciousness is dependent on brain function, that when the brain waves go flat, when brain function stops, we are no more. End of story. But in the Hebrew mindset and Christian mindset, there's spirit. The spirit went to Sheol as expressed in the Old Testament, whether they envisioned it as an actual place or it being some other dimension, whether they thought the spirit was conscious there or not. But from there, God could raise the spirit to life. Quoting again, "I'll ransom them from the power of Sheol. I'll redeem them from death. Death, where are your plagues? Sheol, where is your destruction?" Hosea 13:14. Jesus said to a religious sect that didn't believe in the afterlife, "You're mistaken, not knowing the Scriptures nor the power of God." Matthew 22:29. There is an afterlife, and God has the power to take us there. God doesn't need our brains at all to sustain our consciousness or to revive our consciousness. In verse 17, "Show me a sign of your goodness, that those who hate me may see it and be shamed." End quote. David's asking for a visible sign that God is with him, a sign so obvious that no one can refute it. Psalm 87 is next.